On this edition of the American Landscape, the crew and I are heading to Las Vegas, Nevada. It's Mobsters, Nukes, and Neon. Hi, I'm Greg Nutt, and welcome to the American Landscape. Before we finish the last leg of our journey into Las Vegas, we're taking a little side trip to the Mohave Memorial Cross. Originally dedicated to all those who died in World War I, it is now dedicated to the dead of all wars. The cross is located about 38 miles from Baker, California on SEMA Road. Now it's back on the road to Las Vegas. Before we head off to this episode's major attractions, it's time for a little sightseeing, Las Vegas style. Whether you fly into Las Vegas or drive like we do, it's kind of like arriving in an oasis in the desert. While Las Vegas as a destination certainly has a lot to offer, and we're going to see a few of those on this trip, the journey to Las Vegas has a few surprises in store for you. All you need to do is make up your mind to slow down a little and enjoy the little things. If you're arriving from the Northeast, the Valley of Fire is well worth the stop. A lunch at the Little Alien might provide some insight to Area 51 and Little Green Men. From the west, Red Rock Canyon National Park is beautiful. From the east, I always like to stop at Hoover Dam. The view from the Mike Callahan Pat Tillman Memorial Bridge is breathtaking. Not that my cameraman and friend Rich would know, the view from the 886 feet above the Colorado River is just too much for him. And if you're coming from the south like we are today, there are no shortages of little side trips. Calico Ghost Town, the Early Man Site, the Baghdad Cafe, Roy's Motel and Cafe, and the Amboy Crater National Natural Landmark. Plus, many, many more like the Mohave Cross, which was our stop on this trip. There's so much to do in Las Vegas, it might be hard to decide. Taking a show, gamble, hang out at the pool, shop. How's one to really decide? I've been to Las Vegas so many times now, it's a challenge to me just to find something new. And that's what we have in store for you today, the Mob Museum and the National Atomic Testing Museum. But first, a little tradition of my friends and crew, cruise the strip in downtown and take in the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas. Neon is giving way to much more efficient and spectacular lighting, but it's still worth the cruise to see all the lights. Plus, if you're not into gambling or you just want to take a break, there's all kinds of things to do for free on the Strip and downtown. See the water fountain show of all water fountain shows at the Bellagio. Or take in the sights and sounds of the Fremont Experience in historic downtown Las Vegas. Next on the American Landscape, we're at the Mob Museum, just north of the Fremont Experience in downtown Las Vegas. I'm on my way to see Jeff Burbank, the Content Development Specialist for the museum. Jeff, tell me a little bit about the museum and how it got started.
Well, we opened on Valentine's Day 2012, and that's our anniversary, and it has a lot of significance about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And this is the first federal building in Las Vegas. It opened in 1931, and the city of Las Vegas received it for $1 in 2002, and it evolved into the Mob Museum. Kefauver hearings, one of the hearings happened here on November 15th, 1950. And that was a congressional committee that was touring the United States and studying organized crime in various cities. And so it arrived here on November 15th, 1950, and it had a hearing and executive session here.
So tell me a little bit about which law enforcement agencies are represented here.
The FBI, the G-men, the T-men from the Treasury Department, how those agents investigated where the money was going and how the money was being laundered through the casinos, and so they've got a great story too.
So we're standing in front of a pretty unique piece of history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre Wall. What can you tell me about it?
In 1929, February 14th, a number of the members of the Bugs Moran gang were in a warehouse, and then some people and several gunmen disguised as police officers walked in, and they had Tommy guns and shotguns. and they asked these men to line up against the wall. Now, this was during Prohibition. So these gangsters, it was 6 gangsters and 1 civilian. They thought it was just a bust having to do with Prohibition. So they stood facing this wall with their hands up. But this was a mob hit, orchestrated by Al Capone against the Bugs Moran gang, which was their main rival in Chicago for illegal alcohol trade. So they shot them in the back and mowed them down, and seven men were killed.
Like, is that a bullet hole right there?
Yeah, these are spots where the actual bullets ricocheted off the bricks. Originally, when they were tearing down the warehouse where the massacre occurred, a man decided to keep the bricks, and so he kept them in the right order. And so he added the paint that looks like blood on there. We didn't do that, but anyway, we were able to assemble it the way it was at the right height during the massacre. Here we have the actual bullets, the actual slugs that were taken out of the victims. And as you can see, there are Tommy gun bullets and there are shotgun pellets. And also we have actual documents from the autopsy. And you can see how many of the bullets actually hit, for instance, Mr. Schwimmer here, how many hit him in the back.
So we learned earlier that the Mob Museum isn't just about the mob, but there's the other side of the story is the people who went after them.
In the 20s, the Bureau of Investigation, which later became the FBI, it really didn't have that much jurisdiction in the States. And in the early 30s, this was really when the FBI started to step up, and also the Treasury Department in investigating organized crime. And there was a lot of public support for that too, and as you can see in popular culture, we have some pictures here, Dick Tracy, we have these children's toys and dime novels. And so that's when the federal government really started to step up enforcement against organized crime. And also other gangsters, you know, John Dillinger, these other people. For the longest time, the Bureau of Investigation, before it evolved into the FBI, they weren't even allowed to carry guns. And so that's remarkable. And so the Congress allowed them to be armed later. And so that is really when things picked up for them. They could really, you know, enforce the law with some teeth behind it. And so that's a remarkable story too, you know, J. Edgar Hoover and the G-men, how that really stepped up in the early 30s.
Now, Jeff, this room's got a different vibe than the rest of the museum. It's got a real 60s thing going on. How does this fit with the narrative telling the story about the mob in Las Vegas?
Well, you know, from the mid-40s on, Vegas became very popular. It became very much part of the popular culture of the United States, and especially in the 50s, the 60s, those were really the golden years.
And was organized crime here from the beginning? Could Vegas have started without them?
You know, the thing with organized crime is that they were the most experienced at running illegal casinos. So when the legal casinos were here, they naturally were the ones that could run them.
Now, Jeff, I know some Sheriff Ralph Lamb memorabilia behind you, and he was recently featured in a fictionalized TV series about Las Vegas. How does he really fit in the story of Las Vegas and the mob?
He was sheriff from the 60s into the 70s. Very controversial. He could be a brutal person, but also he was very personable, and people thought he was fair in his own way. And he was a fascinating character. He wore Western garb and, you know, very adept with guns. And he sort of had a kind of a Wild West swagger to him. And that sort of fit Las Vegas.
So we were walking by here, and something I noticed was this list of excluded persons. So what's this all about?
Well, it's nicknamed the Black Book. These are people that are considered to be so dangerous and so bad for the gaming industry that they are banned for life from even entering a casino. So they can be arrested.
The Mobsters or the Fed?
The Nevada Gaming Commission.
Okay.
Right. So they're placed in there. They're in there for life. And if you walk into a casino, you can be immediately arrested if you're in the Black Book, and the casino can be fined or even have their license in jeopardy. if they allow you in.
Is that anybody we should know?
Tony Spilotro from the Chicago mob. He came in here and he was portrayed in the movie Casino, you might remember, the Joe Pesci character.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
And
dig two holes, right? Because you never know.
Yeah, so he was placed in the Black Book, and he was banned for life. But he was still living here, with his family. He just wasn't allowed to walk into any casinos.
No casino. There's no way he couldn't work in the back, do anything.
No,
Just absolutely excluded.
You couldn't even go into a coffee shop or a gift shop.
Well, that's about all the time we have in this segment. I hope you enjoyed the Mob Museum in downtown Las Vegas. I want to thank Brenda Hingle at the museum for arranging the tour and Jeff Burbank for spending the time to show us around the museum. I highly encourage anybody who is in Las Vegas or make a special trip to Las Vegas for this museum. A very high quality. You could spend hours. I know the crew and I spent a couple hours after filming just checking out all the other exhibits. We just scratched the surface, and I hope we laid the seed of interest for you to stop by this museum on your next trip to Las Vegas. On our next stop in Las Vegas, it's the National Atomic Testing Museum, where we're going to be talking with Michael D. Hall, the executive director. I served in the Air Force during the Cold War, so I think I'll find this place particularly interesting, and I hope you do too. Michael, can you tell me a little bit about the museum and what its mission is?
Well, we interpret mainly the history of the Nevada test site, where from 1951 to 1992, over 1,000 nuclear tests took place.
Wow, that's amazing that many nuclear devices. The way we think of nuclear devices today compared to probably the 50s is 180 degrees different.
That's true, and it was a big part of the Cold War period, our development of nuclear technology and the arms race. And of course, today there's some parallels to North Korea. We no longer test, but there are other countries that are entering that realm of nuclear weapons.
Now, you mentioned to me earlier when we were talking about horizontal versus vertical, where Korea is doing a horizontal. We used to do that, but then we went vertical. And what's the significant difference between the two?
There are some real parallels. Now, in 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union signed a treaty that all testing would take place underground. So they had to develop a completely different technology to test nuclear weapons. At the Nevada test site, they had horizontal tunnels. We're standing in a portal here of a horizontal tunnel where they did weapons effects tests. These were very small tests that were testing different components that would, how they would react to a nuclear detonation. But most of the tests here at the test site took place in deep vertical shafts. Other countries have not done that or really cannot do that because it was a very technical process to develop big hole and deep hole drilling to do those tests in.
And is it still classified, or can you tell us how deep some of those vertical shafts needed to be?
They were in the neighborhood of 1,500 feet. And it's pretty much all declassified. In fact, a good half of the second half of our museum deals with the period of underground testing. Here at the Nevada test site, they did about 100 above-ground tests. Some of those involved cases of fallout, and fallout was an issue, one of many, that brought about the underground, or the limited test ban treaty in 1963 that President Kennedy forced through that actually led to underground testing. When you tested devices underground, it was fairly safe. There was no leakage of radiation or any contamination.
Now, on that note, we had talked about, is it safe to go out there?
There is some background radiation out there. It's very safe. They actually use that to their advantage because they train a lot of first responders out there today to learn how to use Geiger counters. However, the Department of Energy actually gives tours of the test site to the public.
Really?
Once a month, the tours leave this museum. They're run by the Department of Energy, but they're often hosted by some of our board members that worked out there for years. Wow. And you can actually take a tour of the test site today. It's very safe.
What kind of days involved if you're going to go out and do that?
It's a long day. The bus leaves here early in the morning. It's a good hour drive out there. It's about 65 miles from Las Vegas to the north. And they give a very good tour of the site. Usually on the tour, they also include an experience where you go to Sedan Crater. That was actually one of the biggest man-made craters. It was made by an atomic weapon. They actually had a project back then called Operation Plowshare, where they were actually trying to develop the idea of building harbors and canals with nuclear weapons. Wow. So they were making craters with nuclear weapons.
That's amazing. And now, and these are all the little depressions. If I go to Google Earth, I can see all these like pock marks, right?
Most of those actually are due to the underground testing. Those are not from bombs going off on the surface. Now, what happened when they exploded all these weapons deep underground, they would actually vaporize the oxygen in a little pocket underground. That would cause the top of the surface to go like this. It's called a depression crater, and that's what you see. There's about 860 some of those out there, I believe, roughly.
That's amazing. Now, you mentioned President Kennedy earlier, and we know he's a big advocate of the space program, but why would he come to a nuclear test site about the space program?
Well, there were a lot of other exciting projects going on out here other than nuclear testing. One was a project where they were actually developing a nuclear-powered rocket, and he came out to tour that facility. And it was a very successful project. That technology still exists today, and if NASA ever takes men to Mars, they may use that technology developed here at the test site.
So 40, 50-year-old technology still viable today to get us to another planet?
It very well could be in our future.
That is pretty amazing, thinking how old that is. And relatively safe. I mean, the radiation out in space would dissipate to not even be a problem.
In deep space, it's not a problem. The worst problem astronauts have in space is the natural radiation you get from the sun. So a 3-year journey to Mars would be very difficult because they would absorb a lot of radiation. A nuclear-powered rocket engine would actually take them there in 90 days.
And right behind our cameraman is the Ground Zero Theater, where you get kind of a simulation of what?
Well, that's one of our most popular attractions. It's on the standard tour for everybody who comes through the museum. The film gives a good orientation of the whole history of the test site, but the first part of it simulates what it was like to actually sit and observe one of these early above-ground nuclear tests that took place at the test site. There were about 100 of those, as I said, and VIPs would be invited out there, newsmen, congressmen. At times, I was told there were actually school groups taken out there. And you would sit out on benches in the open 9 miles away from a nuclear blast. And the film recreates what that was like, the feeling of it.
And then you also mentioned, I sort of chuckled, the Area 51 connection. It was a long time that wasn't acknowledged it even existed out there. But Area 51, as far as nuclear testing, is completely outside of the conspiracies of UFOs, right?
Well, we have a lot of exhibits on Area 51. We're going to have a new exhibit opening at the end of the month. It's a fascinating history. Most of it's documented now. It doesn't deal with aliens. It deals with some very interesting topics. And it was closely associated with the test site in the early days. And then eventually a lot of different projects took place out there. As the most well-known thing is the development of the U-2 spy plane, which was a huge part of our Cold War history.
I was lucky enough to be stationed at Beale with the U-2 and the SR-71, so yeah, it's a great connection. All right, so we're standing next to, I'm thinking this is a replica, and this is on
This
loan,
is a model.
right?
This is a model of a canister or rack. They were two different terms, but they were the same thing. It was basically a big device that you would lower the nuclear weapon into the ground on. But up above would be shelves where you'd have diagnostic equipment and cables would go to that, so that when the explosion took place, you could get valuable data from the test.
And then you mentioned one reason we're really one of the only ones that did this vertical testing is because we were able to do what?
Well, it was very difficult to dig a hole to put this in because the hole had to be dug perfectly straight. Now it sounds kind of crazy, but that's a very difficult engineering challenge. We developed that. It's big, wide hole drilling. Some of these were even much bigger than this, and some were over 100 feet tall. So in order to lower something like this into a big hole, that hole had to be perfectly straight.
And then this is a one-use only, right? This thing's vaporized.
Yes, once the bomb goes off, everything gets vaporized, but the data has to be transmitted in a very fast manner through the cables. And you know, that's critical. We weren't just setting bombs off just to say we were setting bombs off. These were nuclear tests, physics tests. We were learning all sorts of things. There were many reasons for doing nuclear testing. One of the main reasons was to make the weapons actually safer. And when I say safer, you know, over the years there were some nuclear accidents where airplanes crashed or accidentally disposed of a nuclear weapon, but we've never had a nuclear weapon go off by accident because of all the intense testing and careful attention to developing safe warheads.
How much time do I need to set aside to really enjoy this museum?
If you're really interested in the experience, it takes at least 2 hours to tour the museum. We are opening a new theater at the end of this month that will add a whole new dimension to our museum. We're going to offer a daily features on Area 51, a Smithsonian feature on the history of the test site, and also a film on the basics of what radiation is. And those films will be added free to the ticket price. We have a whole range of things. We have discount for seniors, for military people. We also have a lot of Groupon discounts. We're open every day, and we work with a wide variety of people and school groups too. Almost everybody that comes to the museum tells me they love the Area 51 experience, but they are amazed by the actual museum itself because they don't realize, and there's a great deal of pop culture from the atomic era that we portray in the museum. It's not just all atomic bombs. We talk about the Miss Atomic Bomb Beauty Contest and all sorts of interesting things, and people really come out with a positive experience. And of course, Area 51 initially was just a small part of the test site. It was very closely connected, and people are really, truly amazed with all the documented history that this museum provides.
Great. Well, thank you for spending some time with us. We do consider this an honor to come to this museum, get the chance to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the next time you're in Las Vegas, stop in at the National Atomic Testing Museum. It's well worth your time, it's family appropriate, and it's very well done. A lot of great information here.
Go ahead and make sure you do that from now on. That would be